Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to BTC Radio Audiobook and ASMR. I'm thrilled to be your host today. Over the next few minutes, we'll embark on a journey through the airwaves, exploring diverse topics, sharing stories. So, sit back, relax, and let us be the soundtrack to your day. Stay tuned for an unforgettable experience right here. Tonight you are listening to Jews in Many Lands by Elkan Nathan Adler, Part 3. Part 3. The Environs of Jerusalem. The Tomb of Rachel. Rachev's tomb is probably one of the most genuine of the many places of historical note near Jerusalem. Yet even its authenticity has been disputed. Many a modern critic, being a Geist der Staatsvernunft, thinks that Rachel was buried to the north of Jerusalem, and not to the south, on the right of the road to Bethlehem. In this, he is merely repeating a Talmudical controversy between the Minim, or early Christians, and the Jews. Such skepticism, however, is like its own vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself, and falls upon the other. The weight of authority is in favor of tradition this time, and even Robinson accepts the traditional tomb as the genuine one. Throughout historical times, Jew, Christian, and Saracen have revered the spot as sacred to the memory of their common mother, the most womanly and the most tender of all the Bible characters. The only practical difficulty which makes against the identification of this locality is the passage in 1 Samuel x:2, where the prophet tells Saul, his future king, that he will find 2 men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah. It has been urged, and is no doubt true, that the boundary between the territories of Judah and Benjamin could not have passed this way. 90 Jews in Many Lands. The difficulty, however, has been satisfactorily solved by Boris Schick, the clever German architect, whose wonderful model of the temple makes his house near the new Rothschild Hospital, just outside the Jaffa Gate, one of the show places of Jerusalem. Herr Schick lectured on the subject before the local German Society in October 1878, and his paper is printed in the first, the 1881, volume of Lunch's valuable Jerusalem Annual. Mr. Lunch is himself one of the most interesting and praiseworthy of the Jewish residents of Palestine, one of those men who forbid us to despair of the future progress and improvement of our brethren there. He is totally blind, but his energy is inexhaustible, his temper unsoured, and his literary work of considerable merit. In all probability, there were 2 monuments bearing Rachel's name. The real one was in Judah, and is that which I am now describing. The other was a cenotaph, like Absalom's tomb. It is, of course, identical with the pillar in the King's Dale, i.e., the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which he reared up for himself in his lifetime, for, he said, have no son to keep my name in remembrance, and he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. Rachel's cenotaph was, probably, a monument erected by the Benjamites in memory of their ancestress, upon their own land, near the border, and on a spot whence the real sepulchre could be seen. Anyhow, nowadays it is only the latter which is known and venerated. Pilgrims of all creeds hold it in esteem, but it is most patronized by our co-religionists. Pilgrims, Jews, I am sorry to say, do not constitute even a 15th part of the 7,000 or 8,000 Hajis who annually visit the Holy City, and of the 500 or so who do go there, I, as an Ashkenazi, am sorry to say that the very large majority are Sephardim. Curiously enough, a great proportion come from the Caucasus, and, indeed, this only strengthens the sense of Russian propaganda, the leading political impression, which forces itself upon every traveler in the Sultan's dominions. More than 1/4 of the total number of pilgrims to Palestine are Russian. The Orthodox Church wishes to make Jerusalem the Rome of Greek Catholicism, and its patriarch, the dignified Geratheus, its pope. Every acre of land in the market seems to be bought by Russian gold. Almost all the new buildings of note are Russian, even to the unsightly bell tower on the Mount of Olives, which dominates and deafens Jerusalem, and can be seen from the distant, desolate, depressed, and depressing shores of the Dead Sea. Russian interest or interference in the holy places could not be better exemplified than by the visit of the imperial archdukes whose arrival was being expected during my stay in Palestine. In their honor and for their comfort, all was bustle and confusion. It is no figure of speech to say that their path was smoothed for them. The Jaffa road was made passable, and a new carriage road to Hebron was finished actually before the contract time, so as to be ready for their royal progress. The late Baron de Hirsch was profoundly impressed by the belief that Palestine was 92 Jews in many lands, destined to fall into the hands of Russia. And it was this, and this alone, as he himself assured me, that led him to fix upon Argentina, rather than the Holy Land, as the scene of his great experiment in Jewish agriculture. Riouf Pasha. The real credit for the great development of engineering activity, which is making Palestine easy and delightful to travel in, is due to the enlightened policy of the governor of Palestine, Riouf Pasha. His Excellency, to whom I had a letter of introduction from a personal friend, who was a fellow student of his in Paris, received me most amiably on the half a dozen occasions or so on which I interviewed him. He is a tall man with a long gray beard, and, despite his thoughtful, almost dreamy eyes, his military bearing is unmistakable. He speaks French almost as well as Turkish, better, indeed, than Arabic, for in government circles Turkish is the official language. He is a very zealous Mussulman, perhaps even a little bigoted, and his strength of will is such that, where questions of religious principle are concerned, he has actually, and with success, braved the displeasure of the Grand Vizier at Constantinople, and disregarded the firman of his imperial master. Rather more friendly to Jews than to Christians, he yet regards our presence in the Holy Land as a danger to the state, for, like all devout Moslems, he firmly believes in our political restoration to the land of our forefathers, and personally fears that such restoration will take place within the near future. The result is that he has placed, and continues to place, obstacles in the way of the growth of colonies there. He has actually forbidden the roofing in and completion of a synagogue which was being built in Rishon LeZion for the members of that colony. Still he is just and friendly, and has the greatest confidence in and esteem for M. Nissim Behar, who is, I should say, the most influential person in Jerusalem, and deservedly so. The Pasha only on one occasion received me in Oriental dress, and then apologized for not being in European garb. I am afraid I trespassed somewhat on his good nature. The legal business on which I had to see him was troublesome and difficult, but he was uniformly gracious. Still, his business face was much more somber than that he wore in general conversation, and it was quite a pleasure to see his features light up when I complimented him on his styleship. I did this in all sincerity, and, indeed, so far as road-making is concerned, he is a genuine old Roman. He is projecting roads from Jerusalem to Jericho, and Jaffa to Gaza, and so on. The engineer is A.M. Franchetti, a Greek, who is well disposed to our community, and highly cultured. The lines of deviation of the former road were planned to pass through the Jewish cemetery, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and, while I was there, the heads of the community were in some consternation about it, particularly as the proposed track was already staked out. The objection to this desecration of the House of Life was pointed out to the Pasha and his engineer, and they both readily modified their original plan, and a slightly more devious path will be adopted rather than offend our susceptibilities. The carriage road to Hebron is what the Pasha is proudest of, and, as the road passes Rachel's tomb, I hope I may be pardoned for this long digression, and permitted to return to the tomb. Prayers at Rachel's tomb. A visit to the tomb is the commonest of all excursions from Jerusalem, as it is the easiest. It was barely a 2 hours' ride from there, and now that the road has been made so good it is even less. Most of our Jerusalemite brethren visited on the 11th of Marcheshvan, the alleged anniversary of Rachel's death. There is, I am told, no authority for this date, except the Jalkut Shimeoni of the 12th century or thereabout. This, the earliest collection of the Midrashim then extant, states that Benjamin was born on that day, but Rabbi Simeon does not tell us the source from which he derived this information. However, the date is not questioned by our co-religionists, and they go on that day to pray at the grave of our ancestress. Unfortunately, they are not all free from superstition, and occasionally some poor fool, more credulous than his neighbors, writes a petition, begging her to intercede with the Almighty and give him his heart's desire. This extraordinary document the writer crams into the interstices of the thick stone walls with a long stick. I have heard of a case in which one of such petitions fell into the hands of a young English traveler. He fished it out with his umbrella, and now treasures it as a curiosity and a charm. Unfortunately, the sentiments of malice and ill-feeling expressed on that particular petition do credit to its author's qualities neither of heart nor of mind. As to the shape of the building, need say nothing, most of my readers are perfectly familiar with it. It is like any other of the numerous Moslem wheelies, white, cubical in form, and covered with a dome, which testify to the number of Mohammedan saints who must once have infested the country. The mausoleum next the Ramsgate Synagogue, in which Sir Moses and Lady Montefiore lie buried, is an exact replica of Rachel's tomb. The original sepulchre had been much dismantled, but was restored by Sir Moses during one of the earliest of his 7 pilgrimages to the east. It is now the property of the Jewish community at Jerusalem, and the keys are held by an official of theirs, the worthy Rabbi Benjamin, who lives in one of the houses of the Mia Sherim. The white sarcophagus inside the sepulchre is comparatively new, and this and the numerous memorial tablets and Hebrew names of devotees written on the walls give it, internally, a most characteristic appearance. One of these tablets is not without a melancholy interest for the Jewish communities of Great Britain. It was placed there by Dr. Asher, whom we were all so proud to call our friend. He told me how, when he and Samuel Montague visited it, they were struck and annoyed by the numberless names of little great men who had sought to obtain a cheap immortality by inscribing their names on the stone walls. It was recorded how this community had contributed so much for the purchase of the ground, and that man had done this, and the other that. It is only too obvious that mutual admiration is a plant which thrives on tropical soil equally as well as, and perhaps better than, in temperate England itself. What most astonished Dr. Asher was the total absence of any reference to Rachel herself. Her name was nowhere mentioned, although all was but in her honor. Accordingly he had a marble tablet erected and engraved with a Hebrew inscription, of which the following is a translation. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children refuseth to be comforted for her children, because they are not. Thus saith the Lord, refrain thy voice from weeping, and thine eyes from tears, for thy work shall be rewarded, saith the Lord, and they shall come again from the land of the enemy. This stone was set up by one of Rachel's children, who hath come from a distant land. The anonymity of the inscription is one of those silent life lessons which its author was always giving us. His love for the Holy Land was ever ardent, and if at times he had to combat abuses, and be himself abused, he always spoke and wrote in a kindly spirit, and in the hope of effecting an improvement in the condition of our brethren there. He himself has now, alas, gone to another distant land, but he lived long enough to see much of his hope realized, and realized to a great extent through his own outspoken home truths. We shall not look upon his like again. May his work also be rewarded. Bethlehem. About 4 o'clock on Monday morning, the October 1, 1888, we started for Hebron. The expedition was to cost me 40 francs, but then I traveled in grand style. There are wagons which ply daily on the new carriage road between Jerusalem and Hebron, and the fare, for natives, is only 3 francs a head. My dragoman had a lovely Arab horse, whose gentle amble and easy canter were very much preferable to the jolts and shakes of the carriage and 3 provided by mine host, the excellent Mr. Kamenetz. Everybody knows De Quincey's story of the Emperor of China who, finding the box of the state carriage presented to him by the English ambassador infinitely more gorgeous than the sober velvet inside, thought that box his place, and made his coachman sit within and drive by means of jury reins pass through the front windows. The result was a somewhat unsteady progress, which led his imperial majesty to think driving a failure, and so he dedicated England's gift to the gods, and the chariot is still to be seen among the treasures of some temple at Pekin. The hint was not lost on me, and when, on my solitary rambles on the continent, I had occasion to charter a pair-horse droshk to take me the round of the palaces of Potsdam, not having any guide with me, I thought the best thing I could do was to sit beside my coachman and leave the body of the coach untenanted. He thought me mad, but to be thought mad is John Bull's privilege abroad. So, too, on this occasion my dread of such an impression being confirmed in Palestine did not deter me from changing places with my own dragoman, and acting as his equerry. We said the morning prayer at Rachel's tomb as the sun rose, then made a hasty meal, and proceeded on our way. After riding about half an hour we departed from the road and diverged to the left toward Bethlehem. Despite the earliness of the hour we found the famous city full of busy Bedouins and peasants, for it is the market town of the neighborhood for miles around. The population is almost exclusively Christian, and the inhabitants are distinguished by their good looks and rather Greek features. No doubt, there is a large admixture of Crusaders' blood in their veins. In 1831 the Muslims were expelled from the town, and they have never since returned in any numbers. With the exception of one man, there is absolutely no Jew residing there. The exception is, curiously enough, the doctor. The whole town has the most perfect confidence in and liking for him, but even he always spends Friday to Sunday in Jerusalem, with his wife and family. Of the Church of St. Mary, and the Chapel of the Nativity, and the other sites of Bethlehem, I do not propose to say anything. The Greeks, Latins, and Armenians there are always quarreling about their holy sites, and however silly their strife may seem to us, we must not forget that, even in our own times, the second biggest war of the century, the Crimean, was directly occasioned by a similar dispute about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the cave or Adullam. At 9 o'clock we left Bethlehem. My dragoman and the rest of the party returned to the carriage and drove comfortably to Hebron, which they reached in 3 hours. I had a good map with me, and determined to pick my way across country, past the marble ruins of Herodium, Frank Mountain, and the cave of Adullam. The lonely 8 hours' ride through wilderness of Judah was itself worth the whole journey to the east. I got a severe scolding from our consul afterwards for venturing to go about in the solitary wilds without a Bedouin escort, and the guide-books proclaim that it is impossible to do so. All I can say is, that I did not find a single lion on the path, nor meet a single hostile Arab. The footfall of my horse disturbed countless numbers of lizards, and 1 or 2 scorpions which had come to bask on the red rocks, in the fierce noonday sun, but, beyond these, for hours I saw no living creature. Near what must have been Tekoa were huge boulders of smooth white limestone and marble upon which my horse, albeit sure-footed as a cat, seemed to find it difficult to step without slipping. Evidently, the natural storehouse of fine stone here would repay capitalists as well as the famous Numidian quarries do. A fatiguing and somewhat dangerous climb brought one to a height of about 4,000 feet, where a fine view of the hills to the east of the Jordan and the Dead Sea disclosed itself. After making frequent observations with compass and aneroid to determine my position, I at last found my way into a lateral valley, opening out from the Jebel Ferdes, and descended into a deep gorge. The frowning cliffs on either side made the scene unspeakably imposing, and the consciousness that one was on the very theater of David's adventures, during the most romantic episode of his career, peopled the whole country with the shadows of the past. Accordingly, after carefully turning a sharp corner where the cliff took an abrupt turn to the left and then to the right again, it seemed the most natural thing in the world to come upon a small camp of Bedouins, clustered round 2 little springs of water, which rose in the angle formed by the double bend of the rocky wall. The Arabs looked just like the pictures in our familiar scripture books, and were doubtless dressed in similar garb to what they have worn for the last 4,000 years. I rode up to them, and despite the incongruity hastened to give them each a cigarette. After that I felt reassured about their intentions, because the Arab is not civilized enough to betray a man after eating of his salt or smoking of his weed. I dismounted, and one of them hospitably attempted to make my horse drink, as they were drinking, from the tiny pools. The noble steed must have been very thirsty, its rider was, but yet it resolutely declined the water, and persisted in its refusal, until one kind-hearted son of the desert doffed his turban, filled it with water, and lifted it to the horse's mouth. The novel bucket may have improved the water's flavor, it certainly disguised the color, and anyhow the horse refused no longer. After this success, I thought I would try the water, too, and so I did, but my first mouthful was my last, and from another such a sip may I be delivered. The experience of that awful taste elucidated to me how real David's longing must have been, when he jeopardized the lives of the 3 warriors whom he sent for Bethlehem water, with which to wash the taste out of his mouth. The story is told in 1 Samuel 23. 13-17, and 3 of the 30 chief went down, and came to David in the harvest time unto the cave of Adullam, and the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in the hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David longed, and said, O that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, that is by the gate. And the 3 mighty men brake through the host of the Philistines, and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem, that was by the gate, and took it, and brought it to David. Nevertheless he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. And he said, Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things did the 3 mighty men. This and other indications convinced me that I must be in the immediate neighborhood of the very cave in which David took refuge during his guerrilla warfare, first with Saul, and then with the Philistines. Accordingly, in broken Arabic, I asked my dusky friends whether there was not some wonderful hole in the earth somewhere near. They nodded acquiescence, and then offered to show me the way. 3 brawny fellows, strong as the Arabs of the pyramids, conducted me up what seemed the most terrible of precipices. But for the tennis shoes I was luckily wearing, I could never have preserved my footing, but, at last, after a climb of about 10 minutes, we reached the narrow entrance to the cave, which expanded like a funnel. Unfortunately, we were unable to see anything but the darkness around us. My last match had been smoked away, and our only light was an occasional spark from the flint and tinder with which the Arabs bid defiance to Bryant and to May. I did not, however, penetrate very far into the gloomy hollow of the mountain, and I was not sorry to return to the light of day. Artis. I remounted, took leave of my friends, and one of them guided me to Artis, a village in the valley oasis fertilized by Solomon's pools. These wonderful reservoirs, with their aqueducts carried along the mountain slopes, are remarkably successful, and prove how remunerative waterworks would be. Artis provides Jerusalem with all its fruit and vegetables, and the whole village is one large smiling garden, which the traveler is loath to quit. Unfortunately, the shade of the palms had to be left, and I had to ride disconsolately on across the wadi, and mount the hill on the other side, as far as the old caravan track to Hebron. Here I passed some 100 camels, and pressed on till I came to the carriage road. It was past 4 in the afternoon, and I had to gallop to make up for lost time. The nearer one got to the city, the more people were to be seen on the road. When about a mile from the gates, I was met by Bezaleel Kamenetz and the beadle of the Hebron community, on horseback, who came cantering along. They had been sent by the congregation to raise the hue and cry, for I had tarried so long in my coming that they feared I had fallen into the hands of the Bedouins. I did not stop, and Bezaleel, who is an expert horseman, wheeled round in fine style, but the beadle was less fortunate. His horse threw him, but he soon got on again, and onward he galloped, I galloped, we galloped all 3. An estimable and well-to-do Turkish merchant dressed in silks and satins was soberly ambling along, on a large white donkey, in a reverse direction to ourselves. His donkey, uneasy at the pattering of our dozen hoofs, pricked up his ears and turned tail. His respectable rider seemed surprised, and fell off. Hebron, though nearly 3,000 feet high, lies in a narrow valley, between the mountains. The descent from the northwest is rather steep, and owing to the rapidity of our progress, our horses were sometimes sliding down, almost on their haunches. It was not convenient to stop, and so we had to leave the Turk to pick himself up as best he could. We rode on and reached Hebron upon the stroke of 5, the beadle had a final tumble from his steed, and thus we arrived at our journey's end. This is end of part 3. To listen to the next part, please click on the end screen playlist or video part 4. If you like the story, do not forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. It costs nothing, it's all free. Thank you.